Last Sunday morning in Kabul, Ayman al-Zawahiri wandered out onto his balcony in Kabul's green zone and was killed by an American drone strike. Zawahiri had been Osama bin Laden's second in command, then took charge of Al-Qaeda after his boss was killed in a 2011 American attack. The two terrorists had been masterminds behind 9/11, and for years after that attack, the US and the West were on edge, always worried about the next big strike. Can that guard now be let down? Joining me now, CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen, author of The Rise and Fall of Osama bin Laden. Peter, welcome. Let me first ask you, you've written a very interesting piece saying that Zawahiri was actually not a particularly good head of Al-Qaeda. He was not inspirational. In many ways, he was not intelligent. He didn't revive the group as many had thought. So what does his death do to a group that was already in many ways in trouble?
Well, Fareed, his successor may prove to be more effective, which is a low bar, because Zawahiri, as you said, hadn't really been able to revive the fortunes of Al-Qaeda. There is a potential successor. His name is Saif Al-Adel. He's been part of Al-Qaeda from the beginning. He's a former Egyptian Special Forces officer, well regarded within Al-Qaeda. He's been living for years in Iran. He may already be back in Afghanistan, and he is the likely successor. But he still inherits a group that hasn't been able to carry out a significant attack in the West since the London bombings of 2005. But they do have more freedom of movement. The fact that Zawahiri was found in Kabul in a safe house, was known to be living there by leaders of the Taliban, sort of speaks for itself. So they will have considerable freedom of movement in Afghanistan. They can regroup. It may take them years. What it means, for the West, it's still some time off before I think they can carry out a really serious attack outside the region.
Now, bin Laden had been the kind of innovator in saying, let's attack the West. A lot of these terrorist groups from the 70s, and Zawahiri's, the one he was involved in was Islamic Jihad in Egypt, had been trying to overturn what they saw as these sort of secular tyrants who were terrible rulers because they were not Islamic. Bin Laden says, why don't we go for the head of the snake, the far enemy, the United States, that supports and gives security guarantees, in a sense, to all these regimes, the Egyptian regime, the Saudi regime. Where does that debate in Al-Qaeda stand? It's obviously much easier to do local terrorism. Does Al-Qaeda and other groups still want to do global terrorism?
Yeah, they may want to, but do they have the capacity in any meaningful way? I mean, the victory of the Taliban in Afghanistan, with the first anniversary of which is about to come upon us, sort of speaks for itself. I mean, now they run an entire country. And if you look at what ISIS did in Iraq and Syria, they controlled territory the size of Great Britain and population the size of Bulgaria. So I think people in the jihadist movement certainly look at all this and say, well, attacking the United States may be desirable, but maybe we can do more locally in Yemen or Somalia or Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. Pick your country with a weak or failing government in the Muslim world.
And when you look at the Taliban's decision to let Zawahiri in, do you think that they were acceding to a request from a kind of old Confederate, or did they, they must have realized that this would almost certainly make the United States do something? I mean, help us understand that decision.
Well, it was a bad decision, Siraj al-Haqqani, who is the acting Minister of the Interior, so he's equivalent of running the FBI, running the Department of Homeland Security, is described by the United Nations as a member of the Leadership Council of Al-Qaeda. So it's the first time in history that a member of Al-Qaeda has actually got a cabinet position, and that's inside the Taliban. So the fact that they brought Zawahiri in, yes, as you say, an old Confederate, and they've known each other for decades, and they're friends, and they basically share a worldview. And unfortunately, there was a lot of wishful thinking about the Taliban as the peace agreement with the Taliban was negotiated. No, I didn't share that wishful thinking. I'd spent time in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, and they just, it's an ideological group with an ideological project, and part of that is bringing Al-Qaeda back into the fold, and also, of course, excluding women from the workplace and girls from education.
You described the extent of ISIS, which I think people don't recognize, and in terms of territory and population. But how lethal a threat does it pose to the West and to other kind of advanced industrial societies, or is it that they're just trying to create another version of the kind of Taliban Afghanistan in northern Syria?
Oh, well, certainly, in 2014 they controlled a lot of population, a lot of territory. Now they're sort of reduced in size. UN estimates of, I think, 6,000 to 10,000 ISIS fighters. We also have this big problem of 60,000 ISIS-related women and children in refugee camps, another 10,000 ISIS fighters in prison held by Kurdish forces. The Turks keep threatening to invade that part of northeastern Syria, and the US government has repeatedly said that it's very opposed to that, because this would really distract from the Kurds, who are kind of keeping these camps and prisons open. So ISIS hasn't gone away. What threat they pose to the West right now, I think, is pretty limited, either in terms of inspiration, or in terms of people going to get training, or in terms of their ability to kind of carry out an attack in the West. That said, it can change. If the Turks invade northeastern Syria, these prisons and these camps sort of disperse, they can kind of regenerate the geographical caliphate that basically was destroyed by 2019.
Peter Bergen, always a pleasure to hear from you, always a pleasure to get your insights and your reporting, and to remind people this is one of the few people who actually met and interviewed Osama bin Laden. This is a long story which probably won't go away, and we will be back to you.
Thank you, sir.